In today's video, we're going to have a high-level look at that loss of control in flight escalation spectrum, simply focusing in on hazards and how the risk associated with those hazards propagates through our layers of defenses towards loss of control in flight. But remember, as a pilot, are you prepared to deal with an unexpected airplane upset event on its way to a fatal loss of control in flight accident? That's always the underlying question in this series, so let's jump right in. Let's talk about hazards and the associated risk at a very high level. We spent 5 videos really breaking this down in the past, and I want to now just have a short video to have a look at this concept of risk associated with hazards and how it propagates towards the ultimate consequence of loss of control in flight. So as we go to the graphic, we can see here that hazards are represented by a big block on the left. And the reason why it's a block is because there's over 20 hazards that have a risk or outcome of loss of control in flight associated with them. And that risk propagates over time from left to right, or from now to later, across this arrow towards the fatal loss of control in flight accident. So the source of that risk is the hazard. So the idea behind this is to understand that this is part of the process called the safety risk management process. And you can see the very first step is hazard identification. Because it's important to remember, if we can identify a hazard that we can eliminate or not expose ourselves to, we eliminate the associated risk and therefore eliminate the outcome of loss of control in flight. And that's where we want to start. And so what we see in this particular diagram are the hazards that we can't eliminate or fully eliminate. What ends up happening is that risk represented by that arrow in the middle is it propagates through our layers of defenses towards the ultimate consequence of loss of control in flight. So it looks very much like this. These layers of defenses are these gates or windows that the risk has to go through, and the aviation industry has put mitigations in place. And I'm going to show you the high-level acronyms here of what they look like. Now, they can happen throughout the process. They're not always necessarily in this order. But the idea behind it, there's these high-level concepts of managing risk, managing our flights that we use as pilots on a regular basis, whether we realize it or not. The first one is aeronautical decision-making. It's decision-making we make all the way from the ground and planning to be in the air and the choices we make as a pilot. So an example of aeronautical decision-making that could mitigate a hazard that could result in loss of control in flight would be, let's say at top of descent, we make the decision not to go to airport A because of turbulent weather conditions, and we're going to go to airport B. What we've done is we've eliminated our exposure to turbulence in this particular case, therefore eliminating the hazard, eliminating the associated risk. Now, it's not guaranteed that there won't be turbulence at the other location, but we now know that we are not going to have that associated risk because of some reported condition at airport A that caused us to make a decision to do something else. And as we go now from left to right, we go to CRM and SRM. And you can think of CRM and SRM as situational awareness tools that we have as a crew or as a single pilot. CRM is crew resource management. You can think of pilot flying, pilot monitoring, or single pilot resource management, using those resources and tools and assets to us in the cockpit to help with our situational awareness. And underlying all of that is threat and error management. The idea of threat and error management is identifying threats and errors and mitigating them to avoid them going to the later stage of development, which is an undesired aircraft state represented by UAS. And this is the existing system that we have in place right now. And in fact, we do have a measure of upset prevention and recovery training in place in the form of stall and unusual attitude training. But the modern implementation of upset prevention and recovery training really overlays the UAS stage. So it overlays UPRT because it's not just recovery, stall recovery, unusual attitude recovery, it's upset prevention and recovery. So as part of prevention is awareness, recognition, and prevention, all the stages before the UPRT, but as it arrives in the red stage, now the recovery stage is the final layer of mitigation before we arrive at the ultimate consequence of loss of control in flight. So this is a wonderful concept for us to understand as pilots. So this is what the hazard identification process looks like and how we can eliminate hazards by our decision making, or we can mitigate the associated risk by recognizing them and applying our skills and competencies in flight to avoid arriving on the right side of the diagram. And we do arrive on the right side, we now have our last layer of defense, which is the recovery portion of UPRT, to mitigate that risk from ever getting to the fatal loss of control and flight event. And I'll end with this, is that we always want to never be there in the first place as our very best recovery. So effective upset prevention and recovery training really does need to fit into the system like this. It's not a new layer, it overlays the existing layers to make them more powerful than they are without effective modern upset prevention and recovery training.